television.
I decided after my dear Betty died back in '83, I had two things to do: either become a mean, reclusive old so-and-so kind of an old man, or keep busy and go around the state and talk to my fellow citizens. I've loved it. Thanks for having me. I love people, and that love affair began not when I was a judge, because you don't see much of the people that way, but then I campaigned. You get a thrill that you can't get any other way, by appointment to some big job or by running in a single county, but the statewide campaign does it.
And as we follow you, we can see that people are thrilled to see you. After all, you're the only person who's ever been both governor and chief justice, the two most important jobs in the state, and yet I have seen you quoted several times as saying if you had it all to do over, you might not have done any of that.
I might not have gotten into politics because politics has become very dangerous now. A politician tips his hat to somebody across the street or waves, might not have the faintest idea who the person is, and if it turns out to be a bookmaker or some kind of a gambler or something, he's in trouble. And it wasn't that way in my time.
So in our zeal to catch the crooked politician, have we gone too far?
I think so. I think people are ruined by innuendo. There was once an innuendo toward the end of my term as governor that I had almost been indicted by a grand jury, which was totally false.
Was it damaging?
It never hurt me. Nobody ever asked me a question.
You were elected governor first back in '61.
Right.
Not only were you not the favorite, but you weren't supposed to win.
I had 9% of acquaintance with the people in New Jersey, according to my polls when I began. But I outworked my opponent. I got around, and he was a nice man, but not a backslapper, not a politician. And he would read from a prepared address to people, and it just didn't turn them on.
He'd been a Secretary of Labor?
In the Eisenhower cabinet,
administration.
Yeah. And he was a nice, very fine, tall, handsome man, much better looking on the billboards than I was. But he was heavy, and he didn't like to move. He couldn't move around like I did. And I moved. I learned a lot in that kind of campaign, and I think I got a lot of votes that way.
Some people thought that you were a sacrificial lamb for the party. Did you think you could win?
No, I never did. It was a no-issue campaign. Mitchell used the issue which has been used against every Democratic governor since Woodrow Wilson, unsuccessfully, and used against President Truman, unsuccessfully, that I was a tool of the corrupt political bosses. That was his issue against me. In return, I alleged that he had been away from New Jersey so long, and he was so unknowing about affairs in the state that he would have difficulty finding his way to the State House if he were elected. And that was my only campaign against him. So you see, it was a no-issue campaign.
What about the charge of bossism? It is something that you did have to confront throughout your career. You always were apparently able to be friends both with the reformers and with the bosses.
I think they both trusted me, and I trusted them. I mean, the bosses, I myself would prefer to go back to the days of the bosses, strong county chairman, which was ruined in 1964, I guess, by the one-man, one-vote United States Supreme Court decision. Party discipline disappeared. I'll give you an example. I campaigned hard my second term, the time I ran, for a gun control bill. People were being slaughtered all over with these Sunday specials in the hands of addicts, criminals, kids. And I wanted to control. I finally got a control bill. But although I had carried in a 2-to-1 Democratic legislature with my landslide victory that second time, First time that happened since Woodrow Wilson's days. I only was able to get the votes of people that I had elected with me on this issue, because my opponent, Senator Dumont, was against gun control and I was for it. And I had to appeal to the political bosses to discipline these senators and assemblymen and remind them that we had campaigned on that issue, had been elected by the people on that issue, and we wanted to have a Democratic Party which had some honor. And the next Monday I had the votes.
Bring back the days of the bosses.
That's what I think. I think there was much more party responsibility then. And now that the corruption here and there has been weeded out by successful prosecutions, I would like to see that old political structure of responsibility resumed.
Can you have the strong, iron-fisted county boss without having the corruption? Haven't the two always gone hand in hand?
Well, they have, but I don't think there was sufficient, the eye of the media, for instance, was not on them like it is now. And thank God for the fact that no one in my public career, now assistant U.S. attorney for 5 or 6 years, judge for 10 years on the county and superior court judge, governor, and then Chief Justice, nobody ever offered me so much as a ham sandwich, for which I was very happy. Because, you know, it could have been different. And I always theorized that maybe people looked at me and said, even if they were tempted to do that, to give me a present, that I was so delicate in my conscience that I would be a dangerous guy and I might call for the law.
Would you have?
I think so, if anybody had offered me anything seriously.
So when you look at your years as governor, what made it most worthwhile for you?
Well, I got to be known as the education governor because of what we did. We new state colleges and a powerful community college system, 3 medical schools instead of none, and things like that. And where I learned that was in these backyard talks with the parents of children, say in Bergen County or other suburban counties. I went there in my ignorance thinking that the top public issue was law enforcement or transportation. It wasn't at all. All the people cared about was education, College of Medicine and Dentistry. Quarreled with people about slum eradication and various things put up by a lot of the black population in Newark. And actually the professionals wanted very much to have that College of Medicine and Dentistry established in Summit or some nice, comfortable suburban town. But I felt that it belonged right in the heart of Newark, right in the heart of the Central Ward.
It brings us, though, to what may be the most painful time of your tenure as governor, and that is the Newark riot, triggered in part by the proposal for the medical school.
I remember that. Martin Luther King called me from Tampa during that riot, and he offered to come up here with 50 of his young men with badges on their arms, peacekeepers, and I forbid him to come because I thought he would have been assassinated here if he came to Newark. There was a very ugly feeling in Newark on the part of the whites as well as the blacks. All kinds of rumors, people in cars with dynamite in them coming from South Amboy and untrue stuff like that. There were people trying to make things worse. They were bad enough as it was, and we lost 26 people, most of them innocent, just caught in a crossfire.
You said you have no regrets about bringing in the state police, bringing in the National Guard. And yet there were statements that you made at the time that infuriated some people in New Jersey. There is a line between the law and the jungle, you said, and it might as well be drawn here.
Yeah.
That's not characteristic Dick Hughes.
No, it wasn't. I was upset, very worried about the town, and I was frightened. And I thought that it called for some tough talk at that time. A lot of these young black fellas had been soldiers, and when they were discharged honorably from the service, they brought back their guns with them from Vietnam, kept their revolvers. And they were being used, and there were a lot of firing here and there, and oh dear, some tragic deaths occurred, which I was very sorry about. We did what I could to stop, because I wasn't very far from where things were going on.
Talking about Vietnam leads me to one of the large apparent contradictions in your public life. You were, on one hand, a supporter of that war. On the other, you became embroiled during your second run for governor in a controversy which found you defending a Rutgers professor who had said he'd be quite comfortable with a Viet Cong victory. And there were people who wanted to take your head off, weren't there, for not insisting that he be fired from the state university.
Yes, I remember that, and I always thought the two were consistent. I defended Professor Genovese, at the same time stating publicly that I thought his sentiments were ridiculous, defending the war aims of the Viet Cong. But I did that in deference to the Constitution of the United States. It was free speech and academic freedom that he was practicing at that time, and he had a right to do it, as offensive as his sentiments were to me and to many other people. But I took a lot of heat from, especially from my opponent, who said endlessly, maybe 25 times a week, that we had 65,000 men, Americans under arms in Vietnam, and for this so-and-so professor at Rutgers to be paid by public funds was intolerable, and he was very upset about it. And that became the only issue in the campaign.
You were running against Wayne Dumont.
Wayne Dumont.
He thought he had a very good issue there. Did you think it might cost you the election?
I did. I did, because everybody around me thought so, including my wife and her mother. In the McCarthy days, when Eisenhower was president, it would have killed me. It would have made decided the election.
How did you find time for 10 children and a wife whom you adored as governor? The strain and the tension and the distractions must have been so intense.
Well, she took most of that off my shoulders. All during the time I was governor, I was a ham running around the state here and there. One time I didn't have dinner at home once in 2 weeks. And all the time she was taking care of the children and guiding them and running the affair, for which she told me afterwards it was a very hard 8 years for her. She wouldn't want to do it again. And then when she became ill in Florida, years later, I confessed to her my regret that I had done this, you know, gotten occupied with public life and the judgeship and so forth, and let the whole burden rest on her. She said, forget it. The way you've taken care of me these last 2 years, we're even. I forgive you for everything. That was about 3 months before she died.
The problems of being a politician today, the money certainly is not an inducement to public life. Are we getting the best people?
We could use bigger salaries. You know, justice is not cheap. If you want number one justice, you got to pay number one salaries.
And yet, people don't like it when their elected officials say they want more money, do they?
No, they do not.
You, in fact, vetoed your own raise, I believe.
I did. That was a very stupid mistake on my part, but I was a little nervous about it, because every once in a while you'd see where some freeholder would lose an election because he'd voted to raise his pay for $1,000. So, and my opponent, Wayne Dumont, had put this general bill in, and it provided a good raise for everybody in the executive branch, including the governor. My raise was from $35,000 to $40,000. But I thought that I'd be careful, so I vetoed my raise. I signed all the other raises. And 4 years later, my wife said that I owed her $20,000. She threatened to sue me for it.
She thought you should have taken the
for
money.
being so done, sure. Actually, I was driven off the bench in 1957 because I couldn't afford to stay. We got $20,000 a year then.
You were in the Superior Court.
On Superior Court and on the Appellate Division. And I always loved the court. I had 9 kids. I couldn't pay for their dental bills, and so I had to quit. And that was when I quit the bench the first time. And I made quite a bit of money on my own in Trenton. And then after I was governor, I practiced in Newark and also made quite a bit of money.
But you could have stayed doing that, and instead you wound up back in the public seat.
Well, that's right. And it came about this way. Bill Cahill and I have always liked each other.
Although he's a Republican.
Yes, and I always told him he should have been a Democrat, but he had to be a Republican then in the territory he lived in if he wanted to go to Congress. But when his Chief Justice died from a massive stroke, Governor Cahill, even though he was a lame duck, put out the news that he was going to appoint a new Chief Justice. And the Democratic senators put out the word publicly as well that he wasn't going to get the new Chief Justice confirmed. They wouldn't go for it. They said it should wait for the new governor. So I guess Cahill looked around and figured he couldn't get anybody confirmed except me.
You don't think you were the first choice on the list?
I think it was a first choice, but of necessity.
Took the state by surprise.
It did. It took everybody, especially the lawyers, by surprise. Nobody, but everybody commended it, and I wound up being confirmed unanimously by the Senate.
There were, again, some extraordinary cases, extraordinary decisions. Which one was the one that made you feel that it was worth those 6 years?
Well, I think the Quinlan decision was the high point. Actually, when we finished the argument, which was, I think, on January 26 of 1976, there was no consensus among the judges. Everybody was going a different way. So the other justices met privately away from me and decided that they would ask the Chief Justice to write the opinion. And I went down to Durham, where my wife had a very nice apartment. She was undergoing medical care at Duke Medical. And I just got there and got my shoes off and put them up on a chair, and she said, "When are you going to write that Karen opinion?" I said, "I've got to go to Japan next week as a guest of the Japanese Supreme Court to examine the prison system or something. And when I come back, I'll do the opinion." She says, "Call the Japanese this afternoon. Tell them you've got to put off your trip. You can't go. I want you to write that opinion right away. That poor girl is dying, and her parents are slowly dying. Here's a yellow pad. Sit down and get to work."
We've jumped ahead from Richard Hughes governor to Richard Hughes Chief Justice. Let's stay there for just a moment. There are those who've said that you couldn't get an income tax passed as governor, and so you forced one through as Chief Justice. Is that fair?
Well, as I pointed out, at the time, I didn't care whether they found the money under an uranium mine under the State House or increased the sales tax or some other way that they could dream up. But the Constitution of New Jersey plainly provides for equality in access to education for every child in the state. And if that is to be other than an idle piece of paper, then somebody, some court, has to enforce it.
But being Chief Justice doesn't make you lose your own opinions. Didn't you still think that the income tax was the way to go?
Oh, sure, I had that in the back of my mind, but I had no objection of anybody. I fought for the income tax as governor, and I lost it by a single vote. But, and then we had to resort to a sales tax, which the Republicans always wanted.
Which was hard for you to swallow, wasn't it?
It was hard for me to swallow, but I swallowed it.
What about a thorough and efficient education? We are now at the stage when the state is prepared to come in and take over urban school districts because the education is so poor in those districts. The funding may have appeared, and yet have we made any steps closer to the thorough and efficient education for all of New Jersey's children that you'd been looking for?
Well, at least there is not a financial barrier to that access to that kind of education. And whatever else is wrong, and there is, as you point out, a lot else wrong, severe overvision by the state and its enforcement authorities is the answer.
You were said to have been Lyndon Johnson's favorite governor.
I think I was, probably.
He took good care of New Jersey because of you during those years, didn't he?
He did. Yes, he helped us a lot. And I like to think that I helped him. I used to stand up for him hot and cold on Vietnam. Even when all the other Democratic governors who were elected on his coattails in 1964 were denouncing him.
Your support of the war was part, I guess, of what won LBJ's devotion to you. That relationship led you almost, I think, onto a presidential ticket as vice president.
Yeah, I was on the list. LBJ wanted me to be vice president.
To run with Hubert Humphrey.
To run with Hubert Humphrey. Now, the Southern governors, most of them, led by John Connally, had gone to him after he was nominated and said, if you're thinking about Dick Hughes for vice president, forget it. You'll lose every Southern state, which he did. He did lose every Southern state anyhow.
Too liberal for them.
Yeah, that's right. And they were mad because of my discipline in the Credentials Committee. I had kicked him around a little bit.
At the convention in Chicago.
Yeah. So, and I was delighted with that, although all the guys, Joe Katz, all these guys around me were hoping that I would be the candidate. I didn't want any part of it.
Didn't you feel some excitement at the idea, maybe I could be vice president? Vice president, a heartbeat away from the most powerful position in the country?
I was not inspired with that at all. I would have loved the campaign just so I could be sure to lose by a little.
Do you think it would have made a difference if Dick Hughes had been on the ticket?
We would have won New Jersey for sure, and we may have won Illinois, but it would have been a headache for me, which I didn't want and I wasn't fit for. I told Humphrey that 2 months before the convention. I said, look, I'm not only not a veteran, of course he was not a veteran either, that costs a little something. I don't know where Uganda is or what the population of Ethiopia is. A president or a vice president has to know those things.
You know, there's a story about you that I've heard. Don't know if it's true, but let me ask you now. And that is that while you were governor, 2 phone calls came in at the same time, and one was from then President Lyndon Johnson, and the other was from then Hudson County boss John Kenney.
Right.
And you said, let's do things according to what?
Let's do the first things first, I said. Let me talk to Kenney.
You took the Kenney call and let the president hold. That's true?
Yes, and I apologized to LBJ for it. He said, forget it, I'd do the same thing myself.
Why was that? Were they just such a reality that you had to deal with them and deal with them on their terms?
Oh, sure. Their terms were not, they never overreached me, I must say that. Now, years and years ago, the power of the bosses in, say, in New York and in New Jersey with Frank Hague was because they paid attention to the people in their districts. If they needed a turkey at Christmas, they saw they got it. If they needed coal, if they needed an arrangement of someone to get their gas and electric turned on by the public service, the county committeemen would be on their front step offering to do these things for them. And Mayor Hague went beyond that. Every poor person in Jersey City who was going to have a baby was entitled to the care of the best physicians in the Margaret Hague Hospital, free of charge, no cost, either for the medical care or for the hospitalization. And when the mother went home with the little baby, Mayor Hague had an arrangement made for the kid to have his picture taken and his little feet showing at the bottom. And it would contain the signature of Mayor Frank Hague. Congratulations to Giovanni or whoever it was.
Well, you can certainly understand how Frank Hague was was served out of that. Were the people really served, though, or was that all smokescreen?
I think they were. I think that generally speaking, there were no gangsters in Jersey City in those days. And Haig once showed me a picture of such a child who had been born to this mother in Margaret Haig Hospital. And he says, "Dick, do you think they're ever going to take that family away from me?" That was his motive. And it worked.
And yet it's just that kind of confusion between public office, public acts, private money contributions, public jobs, patronage, that made the bosses what they were, the bosses whom you've said you'd like to see back.
Well, yes, that's true. But finally, the party discipline that I was able to lean on by holding the platform here, which was an excellent platform, and comparing it with the legislation that we were trying to get and that people were in the legislature, even Democrats, were opposed to. I said, we got to keep our word with the people. This is what we promised. So I got it, and I got most of the improvements and reforms that I wanted. So that I think, in other words, I emerged, Sandy, from the governorship with nothing on my conscience. My dear wife one time falsely alleged that if I heard that the 2 public service employees were going to install a new manhole cover in Teaneck, New Jersey, I'd want to be there to say a few words.
And you still do?
Yeah. I like to go around. I like people.